It's your man MK, aka Bonnet Boy in the building. Now listen, where you should hide if World War III starts. Now, I ain't gonna lie, I feel like the best places. Alright, look, so boom, say if like a zombie apocalypse happened, right? I feel like the best place to be will be somewhere like Antarctica, cause like, so got all this water, right? How, first of all, how did zombies go get there? They're not about to swim across that big body of water, right? And then they'll freeze. They're going to freeze. You get me? And it's like you have all that aquatic life over there for food. All the fish. Now, the only thing is, how you gonna get there? That's another. We gonna work. That's another story. But World War III though, I ain't gonna lie. I don't think there's nowhere you can realistically hide. Cause like, if it comes to the point where it's nukes, it's GG's, bro. Like, you're gonna have to be in like the other side of the world. Like, I don't even know, like a remote island no one knows about, like Epstein. But I ain't gonna hold y'all boys no longer. Let's see, where is the best places to hide during World War III. All I ask you guys to do is like, comment, subscribe, and let's go ahead and get right into the video, man.
III ever broke out, where should you duck and cover? You probably wouldn't want to go anywhere near the Baltic Sea or Eastern Europe unless you want to share videos of yourself near approaching tank columns for TikTok. South Korea,
right.
Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Australia. Not good bets either, unless you're going sightseeing for Chinese or North Korean missiles, or even artillery shells if you happen to swing by Seoul. The Chinese and European Russian heartlands aren't good bets either, because missiles will likely be
You don't want to be nowhere in this vicinity. This shit getting bombed to ash. Down to the fucking brimstone.
Common feature in the skies there too, and even the United States, which was once so well protected from the devastation.
You don't want to be nowhere here either. Nowhere. I'm over here though. GG's.
Of both world wars, thanks to its two oceans, wouldn't escape unscathed. As advanced as its air defenses are, thousands of missiles at once, some of them hypersonic glide vehicles, aren't shrugged off so easily. So where would you go to ride this thing out then? Stick around if you have a mind to make some emergency plans in this era of growing geopolitical tension. World War I and World War II were true world wars, with fronts emerging in almost every corner of the world. However, a third world war would make those two conflicts look limited in scale. The world is far smaller now than it was in the early 20th century. Missiles can fly thousands of miles in minutes. Distance alone is no longer a guarantee of safety, while the full-scale battlefronts that would involve the movement of thousands of troops, vehicles, ships and aircraft would be concentrated in a few regions like Eastern Europe, the Korean Peninsula, the skies and seas of the First Island chain, and the Middle East. The missile threat makes World War III much more far-reaching. To be truly safe, you need to find places that meet all four of the following conditions. 1. They aren't deeply involved in the brewing geopolitical rivalry that would ignite the conflict in the first place. 2. They aren't likely to become centers of dispute by the warring powers because they are mostly or wholly irrelevant to their plans. 3. They wouldn't likely be major missile targets because they meet the first two conditions. 4. They are distant enough from the central battlefield to avoid collateral damage. What places meet these conditions? Certain tropical islands in the vast Pacific Ocean would be good bets. The United States' island chain strategy means that making escape plans here would not be foolproof, but there's no such thing as a foolproof plan, especially during World War III. And in World War III, a good plan is about the best you can hope for. You'll want to avoid places like Guam, which hosts the largest American military base in the region. You'll probably even want to avoid places like the Solomon Islands, Palau and Kiribati, which have all gotten involved in the plans of the great powers in one form or fashion. Fiji would likely fall under the good bet category though. it's outside of the first island chain, which means it wouldn't likely be a
Fiji.
battlefield. The closest place to it that might
This is where
become a
y'all get that
battlefield is
water from?
Australia, which is still over 1,900 miles away. It also wouldn't be an important strategic location for either side to use against the other, and it lacks valuable wartime resources. To make it even less likely as a location of interest for the great powers, Fiji has a small military of about 6,500 active troops and 6,200 reservists, so it doesn't have much to contribute in hard power to a warring party. Fiji has no foreign alliances either, so it likely wouldn't become one of the dominoes that fall this time around. To make matters even better, Fiji is not one island, but an archipelago of about 300, so you have a lot of real estate to choose from in finding the spot you think is safest. Just find the best place for you and enjoy the abundant fish to eat as the world falls apart around you. If you think you need an even more remote location, the country of Tuvalu would likely pique your interest. 705 miles north of Fiji, it's even further away from any likely battlefield that would come from today's geopolitical climate. Like Fiji, it has no security relationships that would make it a domino to fall in the build-up to a contemporary world war, although its recognition of Taiwan and lack of an embassy on the mainland does anger Beijing. Still, Tuvalu is simply too far away from China for it to be a point of interest in a current world war, nor would the Chinese military waste valuable missiles there. Meanwhile, there's no important place for it in the US military's planning for a conflict in the region. You might be a little lonely in Tuvalu though, because it's one of the world's least populated nations, with only about 11,000 people, though it is also the 35th most densely populated country, so if you're okay with seeing the same faces routinely, it might not be that bad. Loneliness might be worse on Fiji, because even though it has about 940,000 people, it's ranked 161st in population density, so you might not see a lot of people if you decide to wait out World War III there. If you want to take a greater risk for a more cosmopolitan setting, you might want to try New Zealand. The problems with this choice come because New Zealand is integral to several international security arrangements, like the Five Eyes intelligence network and the Five Power defense arrangements with the United States, Australia, United Kingdom, and Singapore. Although these arrangements are not NATO-type mutual defense treaties, they do mean that New Zealand is more drawn into the security structures that would pull their members into an armed conflict. New Zealand also has valuable resources for warring parties like hydrocarbons, iron ore, timber, and even gold. Still, New Zealand boasts other advantages. Over 2,000 miles to the southeast of Australia, New Zealand is far away from the hotspots in the Indo-Pacific that would see some of World War III's most furious fighting. It's far out of the reach of China's military, for example, even if it wanted to use the country as a basis for cutting off Australia's trade routes. Because military units would likely not be concentrated there, there isn't a high chance that China or its allies would waste valuable missiles in striking targets in New Zealand. Stranger things have happened in war, however. The good news is that if fighting reaches New Zealand's shores, about 30% of its land is designated as protected, which means you have a lot of hiding places in that country, with many of the resources you would need for survival. In the worst-case scenario, there's a lot of sheep in New Zealand. As of May 2023, New Zealand has 25.13 million sheep. With a population of about 5.3 million people, this means that New Zealand has almost 5 times as many sheep as people, although this is the lowest ratio since the country began to record such information in the 1850s. Why should this matter? Because in World War III, world supply chains would be disrupted. This means that luxuries and even common items will be much harder to come by than you're used to. The sheep in New Zealand therefore serve as a go-to source of raw materials to make textiles. They're also a source of meat and milk if things get really nasty out there. Thankfully, New Zealand is also self-sufficient in its food production, so it does not depend on international trade to feed its people in the way that China does. New Zealand has also typically tried to walk the tightrope between its traditional partners in the US-led alliance network and China, its largest trading partner, so there's no guarantee that it will be dragged into the war. This makes it the safest country in the region that's also considered a well-developed first world nation. The infrastructure in New Zealand is much more advanced than Fiji and Tuvalu, for example. But there is a problem with all of these countries we haven't yet addressed. What if you're on the other side of the world? Commercial air travel would be cut off or at least drastically reduced if such a nightmarish scenario as World War III comes to pass. That means you'd likely need to get to Fiji, Tuvalu, or New Zealand by boat. Perhaps that's fine if you live in the region, but what if you live in Europe or even a vulnerable city on the east coast of Canada or the United States? Iceland is one of your best bets if you're in this part of the world. One of the drawbacks is that it's a member of the NATO alliance, which means that it would be drawn into the fighting if hostilities broke out. Iceland is also part of the GIUK Gap, a natural choke point stretching between Greenland, skirting Iceland, and ending with the United Kingdom. This
Then why are
choke
we
point
going
commands
there?
the shipping lanes between the Norwegian Sea and the North Atlantic Ocean. NATO's control of this gap is a problem for Russia, as it prevents Moscow from projecting power into the world's oceans. During the Cold War, protecting the GIUK Gap became the primary task of the Royal Navy. In the new era of great power competition, the gap has become prominent again as a gateway to and from the Arctic. This choke point makes Iceland more of a potential target. Iceland also hosts an air station for the United States Navy, the Naval Air Station Keflavik. Among other tasks, this base can host B-2 bombers for extended deployments, which it did in 2021. Presumably the coming B-21 will also be deployed there, should it be appropriate. Such a capacity makes this base an inviting missile target. The base is located toward the end of the Reykjanes Peninsula in southwestern Iceland. However, Iceland is also distant from the battlefields that would develop on the European front, and its homeland will be well protected by NATO's combined naval forces. It doesn't help that the Russian Navy is a floating disaster, which almost certainly means that any attempt for it to be a formidable presence in the GIUK Gap would end badly. Russia simply doesn't have the naval capacity to act that way anymore. Iceland would also not be a staging ground for NATO's forces, which means aside from the Keflavik base, it's probably not a target for enemy missiles. According to the Global Firepower Index, Iceland has no military. Its isolated geographical position ensures it can rely on its allies. More importantly,
No
Iceland is a
military, wow.
relatively self-sufficient country, resistant to the destruction of global supply chains. Its robust fishing industry likely means that your plate wouldn't be empty if you took shelter there. There's also plenty of fresh water to ensure you won't get thirsty. Iceland is also an energy-independent country. All of the energy in its power grid comes from its own resources. 73% of its energy comes from its hydroelectric power plants, and the rest comes from geothermal sources. 90% of Iceland's houses are heated directly by geothermal water directly via pipeline, so even if the power grid goes down, you likely wouldn't freeze. Iceland still needs to import fossil fuels for its transportation, but the government has implemented a policy to reduce this dependency. For example, it's one of the world leaders in electric vehicle adoption. Electric vehicles still make up a small portion of Iceland's total fleet at 14%, but the growth rate has been among the fastest in the world. 85% of private cars sold in the country were electrics in the first half of 2022, up from 60% in 2021 and 46% in 2020. If you happen to be by the Keflavik base, there's a good chance you'll be able to get your hands on an electric car and drive to a safer area. If you're in North America and can't quite make it to Iceland thanks to commercial air travel being shut down, you can try your hand in the larger island next door, Greenland. As Greenland is a Danish territory, it's part of the NATO alliance, which means it would technically be at war in World War III. As Greenland is a gateway to the Arctic, there's been interest in it by the great powers. Donald Trump thought about buying it from Denmark in 2019, but this idea wasn't uniquely his. The United States has made several such proposals since 1867. China has also attempted to expand its influence there, albeit without much success. Greenland could in theory be vulnerable to Russia's navy and missiles, but since this place is so remote from the battlefields that would develop in Europe, it wouldn't make much sense to use such valuable resources there. Greenland's northerly location and size make for a safe combination. The further north in Greenland you go, the safer you will be from the plans of the great powers. Greenland also lacks a road network, which makes it even less attractive as a military battleground. Go north near the Arctic Circle, and you leave the GIUK Gap behind. Learn to live off the land and the abundant marine resources here from the natives, and you'll likely have as good a chance as you can of surviving the war. But if the cold weather and the GIUK Gap makes Iceland and Greenland undesirable for you, and you're still too far away to make it to New Zealand, Fiji or Tuvalu, you can try going to the Azores. This is an autonomous region of Portugal, which means they're part of NATO and would be considered hostile territory in World War III. Like Iceland, the Azores host American troops, the United States Forces Azores, based at Lajes Field. There are about 165 American troops stationed there, and it's acted as a support base for NATO operations far afield, including during Operation Desert Storm. Most notably, the base hosts C-17 transport planes and the KC-46 Pegasus tanker. The base ensures that American aircraft and supplies can operate throughout much of the Atlantic and Africa. Hobbling NATO's logistics by destroying it in a missile attack would seem like an attractive prospect if ammunition can be found. Nevertheless, the Azores' remote location means they would be far from any battlefront. As long as you aren't by Lajes Field on the island of Terceira, you'll probably be okay. The Azores might serve a strategic purpose for NATO, but their geography puts them beyond the reach of the enemies that would confront it in World War III. Like the first two world wars, the major battlefields would occur in Europe and Asia, but thanks to missiles and nukes, North America is no longer safe. What if you live there but aren't close enough to Iceland or Greenland? You can try going to South America. This continent does not host any country that would be likely to find itself drawn into the conflict. But where would you go there? The safest place from the war might be the Brazilian rainforest, where uncontacted hunter-gatherer tribes still live to this day. But since you're watching this, it means you're part of the global civilization and would likely find it hard to survive there. You won't get killed by a missile, but something or someone else might do it. Fortunately, there are places in South America where you would most likely be comfortable even during World War III. One of these is Chile. This country is well protected by the Pacific Ocean and stretches down into South America's southernmost point. If Chile does become a target, you can escape to the Andes Mountains. Thankfully, you wouldn't likely need to go to those extremes. Chile is one of South America's most developed countries, has fertile land to grow crops, and there's potatoes pretty much everywhere. Like Iceland, Chile has made it a priority to be energy independent, and although it's not as well advanced as its northern peer, it produces 23% of its power from hydroelectric sources, 10% from wind, and 16% from solar. It still imports almost 71% of its net energy supply as of 2022 though, so if you're going to Chile, be prepared for future power outages, but in the context of World War III, a blackout doesn't seem so bad. If you're in the old world, there's another continent that would be relatively safe from the ravages of World War III, Africa.
Okay.
As always, the great powers have tried to increase their influence on the continent, especially China, but African countries aren't tied into any international frameworks that would drag them into a global conflict. You'll want to avoid North Africa, since it's too close to the Mediterranean. The further south you go, the safer you'll likely be from the plans of the great powers. South Africa, as its name implies, would likely be the furthest away from the fronts that develop in a Third World War. Granted, there are some dangers there. The country has a high crime rate, including, among other statistics, a rate of 58.94 crimes per 1,000 people and a murder rate of 45 per 100,000 people, according to data acquired in November 2023. However, since World War III will be a lot more dangerous, South Africa's other advantages might make up for this, especially if you go to a nice area. South Africa is also experiencing an energy crisis. Ever since 2007, the country's national power utility, Exxon, has failed to meet demand, and in 2023, some homes and businesses went through up to 12 hours of blackouts a day. But in World War III, almost every other place would be too, and if your goal is to avoid a nuclear fireball while still enjoying city life, Cape Town wouldn't be a poor choice. There's plenty of seafood in Cape Town, coming from resources off the coast, so you probably wouldn't go hungry there. 4.9 million people live in the Cape Town metro as of 2021, so you likely wouldn't feel lonely either. These are the safest countries to go to in the event that World War III doesn't escalate to even a small nuclear exchange. If it does though, nowhere in the world is safe. Even the use of less than 1% of the world's nuclear weapons could produce dramatic environmental changes. For example, researchers at Rutgers University determined that as few as 50 bombs with the yield of the Little Boy device dropped on Hiroshima, 15 kilotons, would heat the stratosphere enough to deplete the ozone layer and cool global temperatures by 1.5 degrees Celsius for several years. After a decade, the temperature would still be 0.5 degrees below normal, the equivalent to the Little Ice Age, which lasted from about 1300 to 1850 and was marked by bitterly cold winters such as the Great Frost of 1709. While this would be uncomfortable, it would at least be survivable if you aren't directly in the blast zones, since an exchange of this sort would not be enough to create a full-blown nuclear winter. But unfortunately, if you have plans to survive a nuclear World War III, today's bombs are much more powerful than 15 kilotons, and since the great powers collectively have thousands of them, more than 50 would likely be used. Nuclear winter is all but guaranteed if nukes are used, and with it the crop failures that would kill billions, with you likely among them, no matter where you are. So even if you have a detailed World War III survival plan, the only thing you can really do is pray that the war remains conventional. But what do you think might be the safest places to go to in World War III? And is there even a chance that you will be able to find a safe haven if it escalates into a nuclear exchange?
Place the U.S. states will be sacrificed if World War III starts. These U.S. states. Hey, this kind of close by me. Oh no. Might gotta go to damn. Yeah, I'm cooked. I forgot where was it, Chile? I don't think it was Chile. And I know it wasn't. Damn. Anyways, we gotta get out of here. We gotta go underground. Underground in the bunkers. Just like that one show, Fallout. But look, if you guys enjoyed that video, the original video will be the first link in the description box below. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Share your mom, dad, sister, brother, grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle, niece, nephew, cat, dog. Can't forget about that hog. But I will see you guys in the next video, man.